Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. Would like to acknowledge the Ambassador, Keno Katsande in absentia, government officials, Honorable Itai Ndudzo, the Minister for Mashonaland East, who's a learned colleague of mine, a senior counsel, specializes in investment law, and I would advise those people that want to learn or that want to get free advice on investment law to just visit his government offices. Further, my presentation is going to be on diaspora and foreign inclusion in Zimbabwe trade and investment. The purpose of my presentation, I think just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we had 7 investors come into Zimbabwe from the United States of America. They brought English, so in terms of clusters, that sector is already taken. They didn't bring anything else. Apparently they were deported. I'm not so sure what really happened. But I'm hoping the people here will not just bring us English into Zimbabwe. We actually want money. So to start with, I don't know if my presentation is linked, but I would want to start on a discussion on citizenship before we go further. I want you to understand if there are still any benefits of being a citizen of Zimbabwe. Or whether or not it's not important anymore. For investment purposes, in terms of ZIDA, the Zimbabwe Investment Development Agency Act, a foreign investor and a local investor have the same rights. The Second Republic, in their wisdom, removed some of the provisions of the Indigenization Act to allow for more foreign investment in Zimbabwe. So if you're a foreign investor, you get the same protections as a local investor. So this should obviously be a comfort to all foreign investors who will be coming into Zimbabwe. The qualification for that is that you then register the investment with the Zimbabwe Investment Development Agency. When you do that, you get certain protections from the agency. These protections obviously include the actual investment itself, whether or not the government can expropriate it. We know there have been questions on expropriation in Zimbabwe, or the fear of expropriation. So when the investment is registered, especially for a foreign investor, that investment is protected from expropriation. There remains, though, a qualification that for public purposes, such investment may be, I wouldn't want to use the word expropriated, but if there's anything that has to happen to that investment, you will be given adequate compensation as if it was a market transaction. So that should give some sort of security when it comes to investments. Secondly, we have issues to do with transfer of proceeds from your investment. We're talking about capital, profits, and maybe payment of foreign employees. If the investment is registered by ZIDA, you can transfer inside the country and outside the country capital in foreign currency. So what you have is actually ultimately a protection of your money in foreign currency, or should I say in the currency of your investment. Layman's terms, dividends during the subsistence of your investment can be transferred outside the country. Capital, when you sell off the assets at the end of the investment, can also be transferred outside the country. So this gives that assurance that your investment ultimately is safe in the end. And then there is no discrimination in terms of the sectors you can invest in when you register for this license. You get the same benefits as if you are a local investor. Then the question remains, so why is it important to remain a citizen or to re-register for citizenship? We have, on the other end, the issue of farmland. Our constitution protects the land reform, and there is talk on policy for farm sales that they can be, farmers will be issued with title deeds, which ultimately means they can be tradable either as security or in the market. The expectation is that there will be a qualification as to who you can sell to. And for those diaspora members that came to England before 2000 and didn't get an opportunity to benefit from that process, they can then be able to purchase farmland. For non-diaspora members or non-locals or non-nationals for Zimbabwe, the current position is that you can enter into joint venture arrangements, which are then protected from a ministerial position. And whatever investments you make in agriculture are protected from that basis. So really and truly, the remaining benefit at the moment is the ability or potential of being able to participate in the agricultural sector from an ownership perspective. I move on to issues to do with labor considerations. I think you can, yes. So labor becomes a very critical part. The moment you hire somebody in Zimbabwe, or you become an employer, the Labor Act comes into effect. And it is important that we understand some of these nuances of the Labor Act. One of the attractions of our economy at the moment is still the idea of cheap labor. I mean, you can get the benefit of living a David Beckham life for really little amounts. When you have hired somebody, be it as a driver, gardener, or anything of that nature, you enter into what we call an implied contract, whether or not there is a contract there. And the employee automatically benefits from legal protections within the Zimbabwean law. So it's important on hiring to understand that whether the contract is written or not, a contract has been formulated, and it is to the disadvantage of the employer where the contract is implied, because statutory provisions then start to take into effect, and whatever you may have agreed with the employee, it now becomes a balance of probabilities, a he said, she said kind of situation. So it's important that the first thing that you do is you reduce your contract into writing. And in situations where the duration of the contract is not specified, the contract is just deemed to be permanent. And some of the natural benefits of permanent contracts then come into effect, your holidays, etc. They are then implied within the same contract. So it's also important, and we always encourage it, especially as lawyers. It's difficult to defend a contract where there are no provisions or no reference points, except what you're then told by the client. So in terms of those contracts that actually have mandatory or that needs to be written, there are long-term contracts, contracts over 6 months would have to be written down, and high-wage employees that surpass the ministerial thresholds that are found in your local national employment codes. Those ones definitely would need to be written down. I will speak on whether what you'd need to consider if you want to purchase a going concern. I'm not audible? Yeah. Okay. I'll speak on what you'd need to consider when you're purchasing a going concern. This is very critical because here we're talking about businesses that are in existence. And the previous speaker spoke about documents on due diligence. I think this issue is very critical. You cannot purchase a going concern without doing the necessary due diligence. And there is obviously your legal due diligence, your financial due diligence, and you must be able also ultimately to have an industry due diligence. I say this from a background where we had a company. Well, by we had a company, I was a CEO of a mining entity, and we had a positive cash flow. The revenue was brilliant, but ultimately there were industry issues that on paper the company looked like it's doing very well, but we were anticipating a rise in the ZESA bill, and we were producing ferrochrome. And the electricity component was the biggest factor within that business. So you would have, obviously, people coming to my office, having more children, taking more children to private school, and, getting into debt agreements, etc. While the executive team knew that if this issue on the electricity bill is approved, that is it, the company is shutting down. And it was approved, and the ripple effect was the company did shut down. So a basic due diligence wouldn't have brought those issues to play, and the company could have been sold for a lot of money. So it is critical that you do an in-depth due diligence, especially when you're buying a going concern. And you understand from a financial perspective, a legal perspective, and also from an industry perspective, the projection or where the company will be going. In terms of due diligence and opportunities for going concern, I would also encourage that you look at companies in corporate rescue or liquidation. I say this with background. I've got experiences with companies in corporate rescue in Zimbabwe, experiences of companies in corporate rescue in South Africa, or business, not judicial management. I don't know what you call it here again. I forget whether you call it judicial management or corporate rescue. But the differences between the South African companies in corporate rescue and the Zimbabwean companies in corporate rescue, 75% of the companies in Zimbabwe, they suffer from a liquidity issue, problem, cash flow problem, not really a structural problem within the company. You will find with cheaper liquidity, the company can be profitable easily. And the companies that we have put into corporate rescue, 75% to 80% of them just needed a holiday on the debtors and its creditors. It just needed people to stop suing it for what it owed and allowed some breathing space. Whereas in South Africa, you find that because there is cheap capital or there's cheap financing, most of the companies that go into corporate rescue or liquidation have a structural issue within the structure of the company, which then you'd have to interrogate before you buy such companies. So another mode or another area where you find good companies to invest in is companies in corporate rescue. Obviously, a conversation with the corporate rescue practitioner or the liquidator will give you insights into the company, its capacities, and the issues that are prevalent. And you find with this particular company, we also kind of took over a company, a mining company that was suffering from that. and we were able just to secure financing at different ports. The previous company, they were exporting mineral products. The previous company would get their financing when the product hit a port in China. We were able to negotiate to get our part payment when it hit Durban in South Africa. And it changed the whole scope of the company. It was almost like you've done magic, but what you ultimately did was to just assist the cash flow in the companies. So you should look at those companies. It's a good area to start if you want to invest in Zimbabwe. And then the last thing I'm going to talk on, I'll pass repatriation of funds because I did discuss on it. I hope you were hearing me. I was on the other microphone, is asset holding structures on estate planning for the diaspora. What you also would have to consider when you're planning on coming to invest in Zimbabwe is how you're going to hold your assets in Zimbabwe. We cannot speak like there is no background. There is background, and as lawyers, we are supposed to think of everything holistically. I do not know if in the future there will be a return of indigenization or not. I cannot speak to that. Maybe Mr. Mangwana will be able to assist. But the direction that we're going is obviously fundamentally a more inclusive direction. But needless to say, or that being said, you must also consider that possibility. So when you're holding assets, trusts or family trusts become very critical. That you hold the majority of your assets in family trusts, whether they be immovables or they be shares. And then the company itself can be held under a different structure. Why I say this, we do not have a history of tampering with family trusts. The Indigenization Act ultimately spoke to companies. I do not foresee that returning, but just to be overly cautious for the foreign, yes? It's not. The Finance Act number 2 yes. 2024 does reserve some sectors for locals. Yes. I mean, you can't have a foreign investor come in open a barber shop, for example. That's true. So that would be considered a reserve sector, small scale mining. Small sector. Yes, yes, that is true. Mr. Mangwana is correct. The Indigenization Act was amended through the Finance Act. It was almost shelved, reserved certain sectors for the locals. That is your small service sectors. But it opened up some sectors that were previously reserved, which can be operated on a large scale. But nonetheless, I'll go back to asset holding structures. Best way to hold your assets will be obviously through family trusts. Second best way, after your family trust, will be through private limited companies or private business corporations. I'll tell you a funny story. I think sometime in 2017-18, we were projecting, I believe the job of a CEO is just to project where things are going to go, etc. And in our board meeting, I think we were in South Africa at the time, I then said, it was at the Ferrochrome company. I then said, look, that was in 2016, so the Indigenization Act was still operational. I then said, look, we need to foresee that we get credits for this indigenization. So what I would want to do is, instead of the company itself getting the claims, I would want to give the claims to the locals, and then we tribute these particular claims. And then obviously I declared my interest that I've got a couple of people that have been stressing me for opportunities. What I then did was The government then eventually issued us claims, and because there were a few ferrochrome companies operating at the time, they were on a first-come, first basis. So we had to submit the applications for the company very quickly. And then I just put a blast message to the people that were literally stressing me before to say, listen, can you bring companies that you have so that I can register these claims in your name, etc., use the support letter from our company, and then submit this to the government because they're on a first-come, first-served basis, and we do not want to lose the best claims that are available. It was very unfortunate that people didn't have companies registered. And all I just needed was a company. Everything else, we were paying for this. And only one person ultimately came up with a company out of 10, 15 people I spoke to. We ended up having to register the claims in our names, which was not bad for us. It actually saved us a lot of money. But I'm talking about preparation to basically say sometimes the opportunity will come, but the person is not prepared. So these are just simple things that people should have, whether you're in the diaspora or you're in Zimbabwe. If you've got a mind in Zimbabwe, you must just have a company registered in Zimbabwe, so that when an opportunity visits you, to be quite honest, there are so many legal risks that are attended when I'm trading with an individual than when I'm trading with a company. So that opportunity means those people. And while we are on that, we just have, I'll just comment a little bit on Statutory Instrument 108 of 2025, which just came out last week, talking about, well, the issue of re-registration has been happening, but those that are holding companies in Zimbabwe that were registered before the Companies and Other Business Entities Act would have to re-register them so they are integrated onto the digital platform by April 2026. If that doesn't happen, the company is ultimately deregistered. That is just for your information. Another protective mechanism, obviously, would be to have foreign branches for companies that are already operating here and also want to operate in Zimbabwe. You have an option of opening a foreign branch, yes. You have an option of opening the foreign branch where, in terms of Zimbabwean law, the company is actually registered outside and the assets belong to the head office that's outside. Partnerships are risky ventures because the assets of the individual, personal assets, are touchable if anybody in the partnership does anything that is funny. So if you're in a partnership, your partner creates an obligation somewhere else, I can ultimately come and sue the other partner because their assets are joined together. Joint ventures is what I spoke on. Joint ventures is what ultimately I spoke on earlier on. It allows the two companies to be separate, although working together. It is a smarter way of doing the partnership. I'll speak briefly. He's talking to me about my time on multi-jurisdictional estate planning. As the last thing, I'll be done. As the last thing. Obviously, because people here want to do business in Zimbabwe, you then have to plan your estate with the knowledge that you may have assets in England and you have assets in Zimbabwe. In terms of our law in Zimbabwe, immovable properties is subject to the laws of Zimbabwe or the property where the property is situated. So even if you have your estate is being done in Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe does not deal with the immovable property that is in England. Our law says England should deal with its own immovable property. If your property is in Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe's law becomes applicable to all the immovable properties. In terms of movable property, where the deceased was domiciled, the laws of that land, they take precedence. And this is ultimately in situations where people die without wills. If you do die with a will, and your estate is registered here in England, we do accept the registered estate. The executor can be registered, so some assets in Zimbabwe can be distributed in terms of that will. Only difference is we then have qualifications in the sense that your will here has to meet formalities of a legal will in Zimbabwe. So if it doesn't meet those formalities, then it can be disputed, and then your estate will be distributed in terms of the laws of Zimbabwe. Thank you very much.